Welcome back to the Nova Emporium. We are up to chapter 21, which is called Fear. Daniel had been walking with Sharp for over an hour. They were searching one of the wonders, an ancient Egyptian pyramid filled with golden corridors from top to bottom, because Sharp thought silver's magical trace was stronger there. "You carry that book around like it's a great weight," Sharp said, tapping the Book of Wonders with his cane through Daniel's jacket. "Well, it sort of is," said Daniel. "All that power." "Power is a good thing," said Sharp. "Aye, and dangerous too," said Daniel. "When I first came here, Mr. Silver trusted me to write in the book. I was actually quite good at it, and then one day I wrote something without asking him. I thought I knew what I was doing, when really I didn't have a clue. I nearly did some serious damage. Now Mr. Silver wants me to wait until I'm ready for the responsibility." Sharp shook his head. "Making mistakes is how we learn," he said. "I'll bet you are more than ready than you think." Sharp spun and stopped, sniffing at the air. He narrowed his eyes and touched a hieroglyph on the wall, causing part of the wall to open up, revealing a secret room. In the centre of the room sat a stone sarcophagus. The dry air caught in Daniel's throat. "You don't think... he's not in there, is he?" Sharp said nothing. He approached the tomb, which was shaped roughly like a man. He gripped the lid with his big hands and pushed. Stone grated upon stone as the lid began to move, until there was a gap large enough to look through. Daniel leaned over, praying Silver was not inside. A fluttering explosion sent him tumbling back. A dark cloud of screeching bats erupted from the sarcophagus. They were in his hair, on his face, crawling on his skin. Sharp grabbed Daniel and dragged him out into the main passage, slamming his hand on the hieroglyph. The doorway closed, locking the bats in their tomb. "Definitely not in there," said Sharp. They left the pyramid and began walking the Emporium passageways. The cracks in the walls were becoming more pronounced, and fissures had appeared on some of the floors. "Tell me, Daniel Holmes," said Sharp after a while, "what are you scared of?" The question came from nowhere, and it caught Daniel off guard. He thought for a moment and then said, I don't know." Sharp grinned. The stairs were getting steeper. Daniel struggled to keep pace. "You are frightened of something. I can smell it in the air around you. There is no shame in it, Daniel. But I will tell you this. Whatever it is, whatever frightens you, it must be overcome. To be a truly great magician, you must be fearless. Lucien is the perfect example of a missed opportunity. I know him better than anyone. I've seen how his fears have bound him like chains, and I wonder what he might have achieved had he not spent his life running away." "Running from what?" said Daniel. Sharp waved a hand in the air as though he was swatting away a fly. "That doesn't matter. What does matter is that he has wasted his life wrapped in this cocoon of sparkling black brick, cut off from the world rather than changing it. If you let your fears take root, boy, they'll grow and multiply. Fear is weakness." "I don't think he's wasted his life." "You are too young to know better," Sharp said, turning the tail of the sentence into a laugh. "Haven't you ever been scared?" said Daniel. And as the question left his lips, rain began to spit in the passageway. Sharp stared down at him as they walked, and the droplets of rain began to bend around them, leaving them dry. He did not answer the question. They walked on in silence, and the subject of fear floated around in Daniel's mind, bubbling to the surface again and again, until at last he felt he had to let it out. "When I was a little boy, too little to properly remember, my dad died at sea. He was a fisherman. His boat went down in a storm with him inside it. No one could help him. He must have watched the water rise until there was nothing for him to do but breathe it in. Can you imagine what that must have been like?" Sharp did not look round. "That is not a pleasant way to die, if such a thing exists. I dream about it every night. I see him dying over and over, and I'm scared that it will happen to me." Sharp showed a spark of interest. "You are scared of drowning?" "No, not drowning. It's just that, well, I can't imagine how frightened he must have been, knowing that the end was coming, knowing he only had a few breaths left, and in the end, in his final seconds, when he should have been with the people he loved, he had nobody. He died in the dark with nobody's hand to hold." I don't want to be alone. The world began to shake. A rumble from deep within the Emporium filled the air and the corridor groaned. Daniel leaned on the walls until the movement had subsided. And then all was still once more, save for the juddering and quaking of a nearby door, and a distant rumble from beyond. Sharp stepped forward and threw open the door. Whatever wonder had lain beyond was now impossible to tell. All that remained was a room filled with wreckage and twisted metal and darkness and spreading silence. "What's happening?" asked Daniel. Sharp closed the door. He rubbed the stubble of his chin. "There is so much raw magic in this place. So much untamed imagination. It all requires an anchor, something or someone, to keep it under control. Lucien is that anchor." At this, Sharp touched the walls, shook his head. "But it seems he no longer has the strength." "Mr. Silver isn't controlling it anymore." "Either he has already lost his grip, or it is slipping quickly away," said Sharp. "The Emporium is beginning to rip at the seams. Some areas will be affected more than others to begin with, like diseased organs in a body. This is obviously one of them." "How long can it last without him?" There was desperation in Daniel's voice. He hadn't been part of the Emporium for very long, but he felt as if it had been part of him forever, like it had been waiting for him, calling to him his entire life. "I don't know," said Sharp. "Hard to tell with this much energy swilling around. Maybe days, maybe weeks or months. However long, it won't be pleasant." "Days?" said Daniel. Sharp gave a shrug. "As I say, I can't be sure." A pause. The corner of his mouth creased. "I wonder, is it possible?" "What?" said Daniel. "Is what possible?" Sharp waved a hand. "Oh, just thinking aloud," he said. "I'm wondering, what would happen if we tried to use Lucien's book to find him?" Daniel's hand touched the cover through his jacket. "Mr. Silver told me not to," he said. "And after what happened last time." "You're forgetting the circumstances, boy," said Sharp. He sounded different, hungry somehow. "I'm sure Lucien will understand. It's an emergency after all. And you aren't alone, are you? You have me to help. This might be our best chance of finding Lucien. Your best chance to save your friends. All you have to do is create a door that will lead us straight to Lucien." Daniel brought out the book and stared at the battered cover. His fingers drummed on the leather. Was Sharp right? Was it different this time? Maybe he could justify breaking Mr. Silver's rules in a desperate situation like this. At last he said, "You're right. This is the best chance we've got. I'll do it." Chapter 22. Hands in the Darkness. "I really hope this wasn't a mistake." Daniel stood so close to the new doorway that his nose almost touched the cold black surface. His heart banged in his chest. If Sharp's plan was a success, then Mr. Silver might just be the other side of the door. "Something wrong?" Sharp stood a few meters behind, hands grasping his cane tight. He sounded impatient. I'm just wondering what we're going to find," said Daniel, recalling the last time he broke the rules. "Even if it has worked, what if we walk through to find him hurt? Or worse?" Sharp stepped forward and reached out an arm. For a moment Daniel thought he was going to place a hand on his shoulder to tell him not to worry and that Silver would surely be fine. But the hand passed him by, and instead gripped the handle of the door. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the hush. The door crept open. Daniel did not have time to scream. Hundreds of emaciated, wrinkled hands crowded the doorway, reaching and grabbing at him, pulling him forward by the neck and the hair and the ears, by the clothes. He could see no faces, no bodies. As he fought them, there were only shrunken, withered fingers. They surrounded him now. He was almost through the doorway, enveloped, suffocating. Fingers covered his mouth and nose. Perhaps he would die here. He closed his eyes, kicked and scratched and bit. A bony hand grabbed his head, twisted him around and pulled him further into the tangled mess. And then Daniel heard a voice, filling his head to bursting. "Leave," it said in a whisper that ran through him. "Leave us." Slowly the hands released Daniel, and he wriggled and squirmed, feeling less crushing pressure, fewer cold grips. Another hand grabbed his own, this one warm, and he was heaved forwards. He landed on the cold Emporium floor on his hands and knees, gasping, clutching his throat. "The book! Do you still have the book?" Sharp stood over him, his eyes bulging. Daniel felt for his pocket. His shaking fingers touched upon the book. He nodded. Sharp spun away towards the open door, where hundreds of hands reached and clawed and grasped at the air. He grabbed the door, tried to pull it shut, but the hands refused, fought against him. Sharp did not give up. He opened his mouth and yelled a guttural scream from the depths of his belly. He pulled so hard that angry veins appeared on his neck and his forehead. Slowly the door began to close until the latch clicked and Sharp collapsed against the wood, holding it shut with all of his weight and strength. "Get rid of it!" he yelled at Daniel. The words shook Daniel from his daze. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the book and found the right page. Tearing it from the book, he ran to the nearest flickering lamp and held the paper to the flame, where it turned to glowing ash and scattered. The cracked black bricks around the door closed in, swivelling and shifting into place, multiplying until the doorway was blocked, the door gone. Sharp leaned against the wall, panting. "What did you do?" he said. Only what you asked me to do," said Daniel. He stared at the book in his shaking hands, at the place on the wall where the door had been. He tried to figure out what had gone wrong. Last time he'd written in the book without permission, Mr. Silver had explained that there was a reason things had gone out of control. In trying to bring back his parents from the dead, Daniel had crossed an impossible and dangerous line. This time he had attempted no such thing, only a simple doorway leading to Mr. Silver. "Maybe he doesn't want us to find him," he said, and his eyes widened as the idea struck him properly. Sharp gave him a quizzical look. "What are you talking about?" "I heard a voice in that room. Leave us," it said. "I think what just happened was a warning from Mr. Silver, a message. He was telling us not to come looking for him." Sharp straightened up and dusted off his suit. "I'm growing tired of these games," he said, and his voice was cold and sharp. Then he brushed past Daniel and walked away, his cane clicking on the floor. As Daniel watched Sharp go, something troubled him. He'd almost been eaten by a door, yet all Sharp seemed to be worried about was whether the Book of Wonders was safe. In fact, every time Sharp saw the book, his eyes would shine, and a strange look would creep over his face. Daniel stowed the book back in his pocket, let his hand rest on it. Perhaps he was imagining things. Sharp had saved his life twice now, after all. The stress of the crumbling Emporium and all of Mr. Silver's disappearance might be taking its toll. He hoped so. All the same, Ellie had been right. Sharp was Daniel's responsibility. From now on, he'd watch his every move.